So, welcome everyone to this sort of a seminar hosted by the UPO ECR and the Young Proteomics Investigators Club from UPA. Today's topic will be supervisors and trainees managing your expectations. And we're really honored to have with us Dr. Catherine Lilly from University of Cambridge, Dr. Lindsay Pino from Thales Bio, and Taran Srikumar from Brooker. So in order to start this off, we will sort of give each speaker a little time to sort of talk about the subject, and then after that initial phase, we'll be allowing in questions. So please feel free to ask questions as much as you like. And if you feel like asking them directly through your microphone, then you're more than welcome to do so. So in order to start everything off, we will start with Professor Catherine Lilly. Catherine received her PhD in biochemistry from University of Sheffield. And after being a laboratory manager for 11 years, she established the Cambridge Center for Proteomics at University of Cambridge in 2001. She became the professor in cellular dynamics in the Department of Biochemistry in 2012, and she directs a research program focused on development and application of technologies to map RNA and protein subcellular localization on the cell-wide scale. Her research looks at the effect of post-transcriptional and post-translational processes on location and the extent of relocalization in response to cellular stress. She also received a recipient of Wellcome Trust Investigators Award and a partner in the EPICS XS. She's the recipient of the Jean Pablo Albar Proteome Pioneer Award from the European Proteomics Association for the UPO Distinguished Achievement in Proteomics Award. And she was also elected as a member of EMBO in July 2020. So, Professor Catherine Lilly, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Andreas. So from the very kind introduction that I've been given, you will have determined that I have been a student, I have been a PhD student, I have been a lab manager, I've run a core facility, and I've been the head of a research group. So in terms of managing expectations, I think I've done it all. I'm getting old enough now to be able to say that. So as a PhD student, clearly I had lab members who I collaborated with, and I had a supervisor. As a lab manager and a core facility person, I had customers. I had to manage their expectations. And as a boss, as a group leader, I've had a series of very talented postdocs and PhD students that have gone through my lab for the past 20 odd years. So I think I can look at this topic from multiple different angles. And I would say the single most important point within this topic is that of communication from all ways round and managing expectation. So if you don't communicate with your supervisor very well, you don't communicate with your collaborators very well, you don't communicate very well with the person who's just turned up with their prize peptides that they're expecting you to stick on a mass spectrometer and get nature quality data from, then you're going to have a miserable time. So how can you manage expectation? Well, from the point of view of being the student or the postdoc or the person who's working in somebody else's lab, then I think the key is to communicate with your boss and to have regular meetings if possible. Now, that is sometimes quite difficult. It's sometimes hard to pin down an extraordinarily busy person. But I think what the last 18 months has shown us is that Zoom and similar is a remarkable thing. And even if you can only manage a quarter of an hour here and there, then that is better than trying to save up all your woes for one big meeting once every 3 months. So regular communication, I think, is really important. Something else that is very important is that your bosses don't know everything. And in fact, in some cases, they know very little. Certainly in my case, I know very little about anything. And also what you have to realize is that the older we get, the much further away it has been since we were trained to do anything. So therefore, assuming that they are absolutely knowledgeable on every single thing that you're trying to do is not advisable. So you have to, I think, put yourself in a position where you're there to educate as well. And certainly managing expectation is going to be a lot easier if you educate them on what it is that you're trying to do. The other thing that you need to remember is that most supervisors haven't been in the lab for a long time. So if you are in a lab doing lots of practical work, the chances are that the methods that you're using and the equipment that you're using, then your supervisors haven't the foggiest idea how to do it. Now, what this means is that there could be unfair expectation on their part because they think it takes 2 days to do a 5-week experiment. So be very clear in descriptions of what it is you're doing and what you are finding are the challenges. You know, are you missing a bit of equipment? Is there something else in the lab that you require? So turning the tables, then managing the expectation of your students and postdocs can be quite challenging because you have got your agenda and they have got their agenda, and you hope that those agendas at some point align. Your agenda is to make sure the work gets done, make sure the publications come out, and make sure that the lab is in a position to keep its funding going. Their agenda is to get their stuff done, get their papers out, and move on from the lab to carry on the rest of their careers. So there can be conflict here. And again, I think communication is the most important part of this. And to be very, very clear what your expectations are of both what you're doing and also the input that you require from your supervisor. And I think a very, very important part of anybody's life as a scientist is to be able to stand back from what they're doing. And a good way to stand back and look through somebody else's eyes is to acquire a mentor. And that mentor should be somebody who understands what you're doing, does not have a vested interest in what you're doing, but can really help you see the wood for the trees. So I think I've probably spoken enough. I'm sure I'm going to get lots of questions on this. So I'll hand over now to one of my colleagues.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. In order to proceed towards the questions, I guess, as you hinted, there will probably be a lot of them. We'll continue with Dr. Lindsay Pino. And Lindsay has over a decade of experience in developing mass spectrometry proteomics methods for studying human disease. She has trained at the Broad Institute, the University of Washington, and most recently, the University of Pennsylvania. Her focus is on developing techniques for quantitative proteomics, and she's interested in the challenges associated with scaling up quantitative proteomics experiments. Lately, she's been working on expanding these techniques to target dynamic systems, including protein turnover, epigenetics, and protein interactions. So, Dr. Lindsay, please start with your talk.
Yeah, so I'm maybe a little closer in career to some of the people on this call, where you might be starting out, either you're a grad student, you're a postdoc, or maybe you're in industry working as a research associate. And I think one of the things that I'd like to kind of speak about is managing upwards. So as a trainee, sometimes you don't really think too much about managing your own boss, but it's really important, right? So they're trying to manage you as a trainee, but you can also help them to manage you by managing them. So like Professor Lilly had kind of said, PIs are extremely busy people, and I think we all appreciate how swamped their schedules can get, and how easily something that is very important to them might just kind of slip because things piled up that day, or they just totally forgot, oh my gosh, it's the end of September, that letter of recommendation was due the 1st of October. So some of the strategies that I've kind of learned from being a research associate, being a grad student, being a postdoc, are ways to help your PI keep track of you and keep track of your progress. So some of kind of the strategies, as I guess before we get into the questions, some of the strategies that have been helpful for me are having a standing meeting with your PI. at a regular time, whether that's once a week if you're a grad student or a research associate, or if you're a postdoc, maybe that's every other week or once a month. Just having that standing meeting always on the calendar. If you have nothing to talk about, that's fine. You can just cancel it and give them back, an hour of their day or an hour of their month. But having it on the calendar is a really nice opportunity for you to have time with them, even if they might be really busy. And if it has to get rescheduled, it has to get rescheduled. So if you don't already have that kind of standing meeting once a week, once a month, once a quarter, whatever your career needs dictate, getting those on the calendar can be a really helpful way to move projects forward and make sure that your career is still kind of fresh in their mind. Another strategy that I have found with managing up is after you have these meetings, sending a quick summarization email with some of the action items and the important due dates that you had discussed. I know, especially now that I have become a manager myself very recently, those emails are so helpful, especially if they're all in one place with the same subject line or just in the same email chain, or Google Slides are really helpful too, because then my research associates can have all of kind of their latest figures in one place for me to really quickly be like, oh yeah, remember that experiment you did 3 months ago? We should revisit that now that we've learned this new thing after your last meeting. So having that kind of record of whatever you presented during your meeting, whatever you talked about during your meeting, gives your PI or your boss a really quick reference point for helping you out and making sure that you have in writing, you never told me to do that. You might have thought of that experiment, but you never actually told me to do that. Now you have it in an email so that there's like Professor Lilly was saying, very clear communication and a record of it. And then I guess my last maybe tip or piece of advice for managing up before we get into the questions, you can automate some of these things for managing your PI. So I know when I have letters of recommendation that are due, I will automatically generate in Gmail an email reminder to be sent 2 weeks before, 1 week before, so that I know that it's on the top of their minds. That they get really busy. It's helpful for them to just kind of have that email reminder pop up in their inbox. So some of these things require some work on your part, but some of these things you can automate too. So I guess that's kind of the topic that I'd love to answer questions for. How can you manage up and help your PI to manage you? Look forward to everyone's questions.
Thank you, Dr. Lindsay. And as you suggested, I think that's probably like sending reminder emails is a very underappreciated way of doing it, because that obviously moves your mail up to the top of the mailbox as well, which usually tends to help a lot. So we'll continue with the last speaker of today then, Taran Srikumar from Brooker. So Taran received his PhD from University of Toronto as a member of Dr. Brian Roth's lab, studying the role of simulation. And he's currently the product manager for the Pacer software platform at Brooker. Taran joined Brooker in 2019 as application scientist for the proteomics on the timsTOF instruments. And prior to joining Brooker, he managed the proteomics core facility at Princeton University, leading it through the phase of rejuvenation and technological updates. Taran grew up in the city of Mississauga, just west of Toronto, and completed his bachelor's degree at the University of Ottawa. In his spare time, Taran enjoys spending time on the aquarium, cooking, or playing with his young daughters. So, Taran, please.
Yes. Thank you very much for that introduction, Andreas. It was very kind. And I think both Catherine and Lindsay have given some very nice pointers, but I will re-emphasize the main point. And excuse me if my voice is breaking or cracking a little today, a little bit of a sore throat. Communication, I think, is again the topic of discussion today, and how you go about communicating is very, very critical. I think both Catherine and Lindsay had some excellent points. I will add one more layer on top, and that is to personalize the communication style for the individual you're trying to communicate to. So in addition to being very open and honest, I think that usually helps in most cases. Everyone is also very different, and some people prefer very quick summaries of, here XYZ, this is what I want to handle, this is what I want. Others like a more detailed explanation of what your expectations are, why they're in such a manner. And so you kind of have to learn what people's expectations are already in that regard, and how you're going to share your expectation already. And this works very, very critically also as you're moving up the chain and communicating as well. So for example, when you're communicating to your direct managers versus 3 or 4 steps up the chain, usually summarizing a lot more. The nitty-gritty details aren't as critical to someone that has a much higher overview on the entire ecosystem. So that's something to keep in mind when you're trying to communicate your requirements, your needs, your wants. I think that's super critical as well. Other than that, I think the summary emails from meetings, from standing meetings, are really, really useful. I think the usefulness of them isn't as apparent until you start using them and start getting them, right? Just having that little snapshot of about, okay, these were the key points that we discussed. In the 2 weeks down the line, when you're looking back at, oh yeah, okay, this is what I need to prep for this upcoming meeting. It's already there, ready for you. So I think that was an excellent point from Lindsay. I'll leave it at this and open it up to questions, I guess, or Andreas, for you to moderate.
Thank you so much. And as we mentioned briefly, like if you have any questions, just raise your hand using the raise your hand feature, and then it's super easy to spot you. Or if you don't prefer to ask it directly yourself, then just type it into the chat and we'll try to pick it up. But in sort of order to start things off, I will start with one kind of a relevant question to the time being. So how did the pandemic change your expectations towards yourself and your trainees or supervisors and such? Because that has obviously been kind of a taxing time to everyone.
Do you want us to answer in the same order, Andreas? Or
oh yeah, I guess please feel free to chime in if you're. We'll try to keep it like non-cluttered, I guess. But
okay, so it has changed the way that I operate, and I think it's changed the way that my lab operates. I think I became, as a supervisor, very, very aware of my responsibility for the people in my lab and for their safety and for their well-being generally. So I think, like many labs, mine's multinational, and during the pandemic, people who were from different parts of the world couldn't get home. And so I was very aware of what they were going through, and would have meetings with them just to make sure that they were okay. I think in terms of the way that we work, we've all become a lot more mindful of the need to work at home, which I was never trained to do this. If you have dry work, wet work, doesn't really matter what it is, you turn up for work at 9 o'clock in the morning, and at 5 o'clock, if you finish, you can go home. If you haven't finished, you have to stay. And now I think working is much more flexible. And I think it is better for people. I think that perhaps this is what we should have been doing for many years. But I think that's the way that I can see how my lab's changed during the pandemic, being very mindful of people's personal circumstances without being horribly nosy. But having some sort of support network for people who need it, particularly people who joined during the lab during the pandemic from other parts of the world. It's a scary time for everybody, but also really being very flexible or more flexible in the way that we work, and our center of gravity doing that, performing that work.
So I guess that's me next. I agree with all of that. And for maybe the flip perspective, I think for trainees, it's been especially hard because you don't get as many opportunities to interact with your PI as a person. Like obviously they're your boss, and that dynamic is very clear and very easy to understand, but they're also people too. And I think trainees benefit having the chance to just kind of hang out with the PI, you know, whether that's just they're sitting in their office with the door open and you're able to just kind of have a little chat, or you're going to grab a coffee or grab a beer or grab lunch or whatever, that kind of interaction we've definitely lost. And, you know, I think some labs have been very good about rebuilding virtual ways to hang out or planning safe outdoor get-togethers. But I think if you're a trainee and that kind of social aspect is difficult in your lab to recapture, either bring it up with your PI or bring it up with some of your coworkers, some of your colleagues, and see if you can help plan one of those things. Your PI might just not really know what to do, like what's even cool to do with the kids today. I'm not sure, and maybe they don't know as many of the places to go hang out that are safe outdoors that the trainees would feel comfortable doing something like that. So if you're lacking something like that because of the pandemic, and that social aspect is something you're looking to get in your lab, see if you can help be the person to organize that, or bring it up with your PI so that they know that people in your lab are interested in something like that.
Excellent points, Lindsay, and Catherine as well. So I'll echo that. I really do miss the just knocking on the door and walking in to have a quick conversation. Having said that, the virtual equivalent of that is a bit of a nightmare. The do you have a minute for a chat? That always gives me a heart attack nowadays, where you're like, you have no idea where this conversation's about to go, right? Like when someone walks into the office, you can gauge their physical appearance, their status. You know where this conversation's going. You're preparing for it. The do you have a minute is it always is a pain, and it was a big learning curve for us. So I started my new position at Brooker during the pandemic. The entire team has been set up during the pandemic. And so none of us have met face to face yet. And we are very much looking forward to this opportunity. But one thing we have realized compared to other teams I've worked with is we don't have that social kind of bonding. Like we've tried many social events virtual events to try to, get that team bonding exercises together. But it has definitely been a very big challenge during the pandemic. You're on mute, Andreas.
Sorry, as a small addition, I would say that's obviously, like, I guess as Lindsay mentioned earlier, one of the upsides is that you actually, like, the fact that you have Zoom as a possibility of catching up, like, just briefly as well, has, at least in my case, managed for more opportunities with actually meeting my supervisor on the sort of semi-regular basis compared to before.
Right. I mean, Brian, during my PhD, Brian would just walk around the lab at random. And so it just, even if you're not talking about your experiment, how the project's going, just to have a casual conversation, I think it really helps. And it does give you the opportunity to bring up topics that you normally wouldn't, or you may not during your, your regular meeting, right? That might be a very professional setting at that point versus the normal chat, coffee, beer, lunch, whatever. That's a bit more informal. You can bring up life issues, and those, as Lindsay said, and Catherine had said, actually, dealing with some of these life issues right now has been super critical for the mental health of your colleagues and trainees.
So bringing us, I guess, to the second question, which we have in the chat here. It seems, I would guess this says that, do you think there's a difference in managing in academia versus academia? But I would expect it's academia versus industry here, probably. Correct me if I'm wrong. Do you feel that there's a big difference in how this is affected? Or like how you look at the expectations and how you approach supervisors and similar?
I would imagine there is, but I have no industry experience whatsoever, so I will leave my colleagues to comment on this. But I think the expectations are different because a company has another agenda. So therefore, you've got to, I suppose, always have what the company needs and what the company is aiming to do at the back of your mind. In academia, contracts generally are shorter. not always, but they can be shorter. And so you're getting yourself into a position to be attractive for whatever the next position is that you're going to go for. In industry, I think generally there's probably more longevity in people's contracts. And so therefore, there's perhaps not quite the pressure or the necessity or even the ability to publish what you're doing. And I also imagine, but again, I'm happy to be corrected, that you're more likely to be in a smaller team in academia and perhaps a much larger team, and may sometimes not even have sight of what the end is. You're doing your bit. So I'm sure that puts different stresses and strains on managing expectations. And I imagine that the industry way of life is not for everybody, just as the academic way of life is not for everybody as well. But as I say, I have no industry experience, and the people that I have working for me at the moment who are industry funded are more funded like postdocs, so it's not quite the same.
Yeah, for me, Thales is a very small company, smaller than any of the labs that I've ever been in so far. So this is the smallest experience I've ever had. We only have 7 people, and my last lab I think had about 30. So it's much more intimate, which is quite nice. And because we're so small and we're such a young company, we actually have a lot of overlap with the same kind of goals that we would have in academia. So far managing has not really been too much different. Some of kind of the other jobs that I have, maybe I'm not writing grants quite so much, but I'm having to do fundraising and meet with investors. So it's just swapping out one form of getting funding for another. And for my research associates, I feel like it's maybe more responsibility as a research associate in industry that they need to help me manage them, because they're also kind of like a de facto lab manager too, because we're so small, so early stage. So they're taking on a lot more job responsibilities than you might in a highly established, academic lab of 30 years that has all the support infrastructure at a university. But that's just my experience with industry. I know there's some other people on the call here who have experienced both managing industry and now managing in academia. So I'd be curious if they have some thoughts too.
My quick 2 cents on my limited experience as well. I think it really depends on the company itself and the culture in the company itself. So Brooker, while it's a large company, tends to act more like a smaller company, and particularly the group that we've put together is really trying to be more like a startup, more like Thales, where you try to get the whole team engaged. Everyone's ideas are being evaluated, everyone's opinions are being evaluated, and everyone is kind of involved in the decision-making process as much as possible, right? Then we get to a certain stage and we get into the Brooker corporate world, and then we get bottlenecked by procedures and standards. But that has not as much to do with expectation management, but it is also a form of expectation management, because the senior management teams are at that level. So it becomes very critical that you have to translate really your vision for your product or for your team's goals to the management to make sure that it's aligned with what their visions for how the company is moving forward in the next years, decades, whatever it might be for them.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair point. And it's super interesting, as you mentioned, that there are like all of these, I guess, like, especially when it comes to startup companies that are way smaller than a lot of established research groups, which obviously changes the interaction a lot. So as a second question, no one is raising the hand. Oh, yeah, Matthew, do you have a question?
I do. Thank you very much. This has been very insightful. So I was wondering, from a trainee and from a supervisor perspective, you talked a lot about communication, when to have meetings on a regular basis. This was a common topic, and we've talked about the pandemic. And I was wondering, what are the tricks that you use to, one, detect that your trainee need a break, or two, that how do you ask for a break to your supervisor? How without looking like a slacker or anything, just because you need it. And this can be very tricky in terms of conversation. So you must have had these conversations at some point before. And so I was wondering, what are the tricks you've been using in that context? This is for all three panelists.
We're going in the normal order. So to detect whether you feel that somebody in your group needs a break or isn't coping, I think for what my fellow panelists have said before, there is no one way to treat a person, because we're all very different people. We've all got very different ways of working. We can withstand different amounts of pressure. We have very different personalities from one another. So there are a few telltale signs, I think, of whether somebody needs a break or not. They're not, their body, well, this is the difference, the difficulty, as we've said, with Slack. Body language is a marvelous thing, and you can detect an awful lot from it, where sort of it's not Slack, Zoom. And on Zoom, we all sit like this, don't we? And so therefore we could be feeling dreadful and you wouldn't know. We could be feeling elated and you wouldn't know. So I think it's tough to do it in silico. If you are meeting and seeing your colleagues on a regular basis, you get to know them, and you get to know when they're miserable. And I think there is some people would not relish being asked too many questions. You're not doing very well, are you? Would you like to tell me about it? It wouldn't go down very well with some people, where some people would wish you to notice and say, how are you doing? I think from the supervisor's point of view, what I've always tried to do myself is to always say hello to everybody. Sometimes you're busy, you're rushing in and out, but if you try and say hello to absolutely everybody that's in your lab, you can sort of get a feel for how they're doing by their answer, whether it's, oh, I'm fine, or whether So then when it comes to do they need a break, or is there something that they should be doing to ease their path or make them feel a bit chirpy about work, again, it's communication. And sometimes a break is a good thing, going on a holiday, going to see your family. For some people that doesn't work. So you just really have to determine what's the best for the person and communicate with and ask them what they feel is the best. Very rarely, I think, do you have to come down hard on somebody and say, actually, from where I'm standing, you really need a break. Oh, no, I don't. No, I think you do. So sometimes, people can't see the wood for the trees, and they need somebody from outside to, perhaps even another person to intercede and try and find out what the problem is. In terms of asking your boss for a break, I've only ever once done that. And that was as a PhD, no, as a new postdoc. And I was still trying to write up my PhD. And I was going crazy because I was doing a new job in the daytime and trying to remember what the hell it was I did as a PhD student to write it up in the evenings. And it all got a bit much for me. And so I said this to my supervisor and said, I just need to go on holiday. And my supervisor, I'm not mentioning any names at the time, said, well, don't make sure it's not a long holiday. But it did the trick, and I came back much more invigorated. So I think you just have to be brave and explain. Be honest. Don't try and cover your tracks, because you'll only be caught out. Honesty is really the best course of action here, because if you try and say, I've got toothache and I need to take 3 days off, and then you come in and the supervisor says, how's your tooth now? And you say, what tooth? Then, it comes round and bites you on the behind. So honesty and explanation, I think, are the things I would recommend.
Yeah, as a trainee, I guess I would echo all of that for sure. And I know as a trainee, there's kind of like, there's two paths here, right? Either you have a very supportive mentor where bringing this up is not going to be a big deal, and they're just going to be like, yeah, of course, like you barely even need to ask me, take as much time as you want, like I want you to be healthy and productive at work. The other path, which I think is a lot harder, where maybe this question becomes more tricky, is you don't have, either you do not have that kind of supportive supervisor, or you don't have that relationship with them. Maybe not yet, maybe you're really, really early on and you need to ask for something like this. Of course, you know, the best answer would be you can hopefully trust them and ask for this kind of time, but maybe two alternative strategies that I will suggest in case that happens to not be you, you're not in that kind of situation. One strategy is do in industry what we call a skip level. Is there someone else on your thesis committee or someone else that you work with that you can talk to with this, so they can kind of go either horizontally and tell your supervisor, hey, so and so needs like a quick break, or they can go kind of diagonally coming down at your supervisor and saying, hey, like I talked to so and so, they're doing great, but they need a quick vacation. So that might be kind of use a surrogate supervisor to ask your boss about this time off if you don't have a good relationship with them. And second alternative is you're starting to get kind of burnt out. Your supervisor has asked you to do too many things. You have your own project, you have collaboration with, you know, Professor A, collaboration with Industry B, you have too much going on. Two strategies there are, of course, use that skip level approach and ask someone else that can be a surrogate and advocate for you. Or you can literally just break down, like, I work, you know, 8 hours a week on this collaboration. I work 16 hours a week on this other collaboration. That leaves me 2 days, working days of the week, to work on my project. I just want to discuss priorities and what should I prioritize. And then you're kind of like doing a little sneaky on them and pointing out to them, like, if you truly want me to deprioritize this main project, then it has to come, the time has to come from somewhere. And sometimes I have found presenting it like that, as, you know, these are percentages of my time and you have given me too much to do any of it well, has worked really well. And they say, oh, don't worry about that collaboration, and that's priority at all. And you kind of forget that. Even so, if you don't happen to have that like really great relationship where you can just say, hey man, I'm overwhelmed.
Sorry. Excellent points, Lindsay and Catherine, again. So being the third speaker is really tough here. So from
we'll turn it around next time. We'll turn it around you first.
I think that's a good idea. Let's do that next round then.
No, what I was going to say, yeah, from personal experience, I think I've been very fortunate with the supervisors and the managers that I've had in my life so far, where I haven't faced scenario B, as Lindsay had pointed out. So I've always been just able to ask for vacation, or more like tell, even to the point of, hey, I'm taking 2 weeks off, I will not be here, don't look for me, kind of thing. And even in my current role, I think part of it is just building that relationship if you can, right? And it's a lot easier with some people, it's a bit more difficult with others, but if you are going to work with this person, either at an academic level or in industry, you have to build a relationship of some sort. And hopefully you can build it strong enough that you're not shy, or you're not discouraged from asking this particular question, or any other question for that matter. So I mean, with the own people I'm supposed to supervise, in addition to the regular meetings that we have for discussing projects and so on, we have an additional call scheduled in where it's more personal chat, half hour, both grab coffee, just because it seems to be the universal drink, and it crosses time zones, right? So I have colleagues that are in Europe, in the West Coast, and Australia, and so coffee seems to be a nice beverage of choice to bring up during these chats. And there we're just talking about regular stuff, family things, and that again makes it easier for them to approach me, I think, when it's time for their vacations. And in return, I have the same type of relationship with my managers and supervisors as well. So I think part of the onus is trying to build that relationship. But if you have a really busy PI that's barely ever in the lab, maybe there's a second in command, a lab manager that is more in touch with the day-to-day activities in the lab, and maybe you can use that person also as a proxy to reach out to the PI or reach out to the lab head in that case.
Thank you. That was very insightful.
Yeah, very. And I think we actually have a question directly here now as well from Christian Moritz. What's next up?
Thank you. Hi all, and thank you very much for this great event. I'm enjoying it. And my question is about, you talked already about industry academics. And so I wonder, how do you at all prepare your trainees for industry, or maybe related to this? Do you see sometimes a conflict of interest between trying to keep the best people in your group, even if it maybe in the academic situation would maybe be better to recommend them to go to the industry? So maybe as an anecdotic background, one of my professors during my PhD, when there was an event, I don't know, and we drank a glass of wine together, he admitted that he would never recommend to his children to study or to go into life science academics because it's too different to get a permanent position. But at the same time, he needs people to work, to be PhD students, to postdocs. So do you also see sometimes this conflict of interest, and how to solve it?
So this is, I'm going to have a lot of trouble with this question, because I think when I started my academic career, I knew within a month or two that I did not want to be a PI in academia. What I like to do, and what I still love to do, is operate the mass spec. That was what I chose my lab because this was what I wanted to learn, and this was the opportunity for me. And at that point, I was already thinking I am going to go into industry already. So, coming out of my undergrad, and I think part of that was during my undergrad, I had a lot of what here is called co-op experience, so work and study together. So you had 6 months or 3 months where you were already working in industry, and I'd already been in a couple of other companies. And so I felt that it was better suited to me. And this pressure of writing grants was something I could not stand, even to this day. So for recommendations for industry postdocs versus non, I don't know how to phrase an answer to this, but for people going into academics, I think normally, like for my cousins and everyone else that's starting off in the sciences, I do give them a very similar description, I think, as your PI had done, that it is very difficult to get an academic position or a stable academic position, and it's a small percentage of people that can get to that. If that is their goal, all to them, but I just want to make it kind of transparent that this is the route that you would be taking, and that there's it's a very small success, or you have to stay very focused to achieve that goal. And then but at the same time, I don't necessarily discourage them from doing life sciences in general, right? Because there are plenty of other opportunities other than starting your own research lab to be had as well.
I think this is a good question that gets at kind of the theme of this panel, which is managing expectations. This is a good opportunity for you as the trainee to manage your PI's expectation of your career trajectory, right? I think a lot of academic PIs are just going to start training you along an academic track because that's what they know, right? I think there's very few academic PIs that really know what skills you would need to get into industry, and like what prepares you best to get that dream job in industry, whatever that happens to be. So it's a good opportunity for you to make sure at one of these hopefully standing meetings that you have to bring up, hey, I'm interested in going into industry. Can you network me? Do you know anybody in industry that you can put me in touch with, that I can start making that network, building that industry network, so that when I am on the job search, I have some connections to hopefully reach out to, ideally, you know, like some months before you're actually defended, so you can get that lined up. You can also ask your PI if they see these opportunities. You know, like PIs get these emails all the time from like all kinds of recruiters looking for like, do you have any students that are interested in like this random industry, like an internship experience? You can ask them like, keep me in mind when you see these, or if you hear about these, can you forward them to me so that I can look for these co-op opportunities or these internship opportunities. And I think kind of bringing that up, making sure you probably need to repeat this probably 3 times to your mentor so that they actually remember it, putting it in like those action item like notes, like I'm looking for, you know, a summer internship this year, and just reminding them that you are expecting to go into industry, so you don't maybe necessarily need his their help with writing grants and fellowships. Like you don't need that kind of experience because you plan to go to industry, and instead you need a different different training experience. Managing their expectations for this, I think, would be pretty important. So I guess that's my advice as someone who ended up in industry, and kind of goes reverse too. If you're in industry and you're an RA and you're thinking about going to grad school, make sure you communicate that to your PI and let them know, like, in industry, we totally understand that research associates are going to turn over because you got bigger goals. Either you're going to move up in industry or you're planning to go to grad school, and just communicating that so that we can help you get ready for that next step is super important.
When I look back, I've just been thinking back to my former lab members, and a significant proportion of them have gone into industry, I would say, and are doing extremely well there. I think the only thing that I would say that perhaps hasn't been covered by my colleagues is the concept of burning your bridges. So maybe you think you want to go into industry, maybe you think you want an academic career. And going from academia into industry is not necessarily straightforward, but it's a well-trodden path. Going backwards is a less well-trodden path. So I would suggest that always, in fact, the advice I was given when I was finishing my PhD was to, unless you're really, really sure about something, and perhaps you're not until you've experienced it, make sure that you have an exit strategy if it's not necessarily the right thing for you. So don't burn your bridges, and have a broad, embrace all the courses that are thrown at you as a graduate student and as a postdoc. So you might not think you're going to be writing grants, but 10 years time, perhaps you are. So try and sample as much as you possibly can. So that would be my advice. The toughest thing I think I have to do is to manage academic expectations, because as already been said, if you think you're going to become a professor somewhere, a group leader, the chances of you doing it is very small, because of very few, the attrition rate at all levels. I think particularly after your first postdoc, that attrition rate is significant. So always have a plan B. This is what I say to my lab members, always have a plan B.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much. I think we have a question from Isabel Siro as well.
Hi, everyone. I'm the lab manager of Etienne Caron's lab in Montreal. It's just a quick comment. So I've done a PhD and a postdoc, and as a postdoc, we're often considered as to be more autonomous, independent, but we should keep a meeting every second week, or a very secure time with the PI, especially when we have different vision on the project. From my own experience, I force my PI to get this meeting every second weekend. Even if you think you have nothing to say, you will have something to say at the end. So this is just a quick comment for postdocs, especially as PhDs, like the PI is closer to you usually, but as postdoc, we're left in the corner often. So that will be my comment. And thanks for the tie. It's very interesting. Thank you.
So I guess we could continue with another question that I had. So Catherine, you mentioned like the mentor aspect. So I was thinking like something that struck me while you mentioned it. Do you envision like the mentor as someone else than the supervisor, or can it be the same person? And what kind of like qualities would you look for in such a person?
So my mentor doesn't even realize he's my mentor. He thinks I'm the person that takes him out for coffee and buys him coffee once in a while. I think a mentor has got to be somebody from outside. It's got to be somebody who has absolutely no agenda and who is completely divorced from what you're doing, who has an idea, who understands what it is that you're trying to do and what your career aspirations are, but is probably a boss from a different lab or a senior postdoc in a different lab. How you find them? Well, I don't know. I mean, I found mine by accident. Here and probably in all your institutions, you're assigned people. So particularly here for PhD students, you're assigned advisors from other labs. But I think all the way through your career, even if you're the most senior professor that ever there was, you need somebody from outside looking inside who can give you very pragmatic advice with as I say, with no agenda. And you in your departments and in your institutions, you get a feel for who else is around, who looks approachable. You'll hear them give talks, perhaps go to their lectures. So you can always sound them out. Coffee, we've already discussed that coffee is a great currency, or tea, depending what your poison is. So I think most people will be very happy to share or give 10 or 15 minutes of their time just for you to introduce them yourself to them, and perhaps ask if you could meet them on a regular basis.
I was just going to tag along and say, actually, in addition to other PIs or senior postdocs, don't forget the lab managers. I mean, oftentimes some lab managers have been around for several years, if not decades, and have seen batches of trainees come through the lab. And they are also an incredible resource period. And they can also be incredible mentors as well. So don't forget that. And if I'm being very honest, the first impression to start in proteomics was from a trainee, or not a trainee, sorry, a technician in industry, right? Eunice. She literally took me off to the side and said, "Taran, you have to go into proteomics. It is the future." And I still remember that conversation years on back. But I mean, without her, I probably wouldn't have even started looking into what proteomics was and mass spectrometry, and ended up in this bright field. So yeah, don't forget the lab managers. Don't forget the technicians. They're incredible resources, both from a technical standpoint, but also for things like this.
As an aside, when I was moving to Cambridge to start a proteomics lab, one of my supervisors, in fact mentors in my previous position, took me on one side and said, "Why proteomics? It's never going to take off, you know."
So I guess, Lindsay, you have already kind of replied to this question, but I think it's like worthwhile bringing it up in this discussion as well. So what kind of advice would you guys give to like trainees who get like the first opportunity to actually supervise a project and students when they have little experience in doing so from prior?
Yeah, I had dropped a couple links in the chat. One of them is free from HHMI, and it's just kind of like in general, if you're thinking about sticking in academia, it just has a lot of advice on mentoring, on building a lab, on everything involved in starting out on your own. There's also a really good book that my own very close mentor had recommended to me called At the Helm. That's really good if you're starting out with managing. But I guess my biggest advice pertaining to managing expectations is hold some space for grace for yourself, because you're gonna make mistakes and you're gonna mess up and you're gonna feel awful. I think everybody has at least one mentoring experience being the mentor and mentoring down, where they realize they messed up and they feel awful about it. Just realize it's probably going to happen. Manage that expectation with your trainee that you're learning too, and you're both learning together, kind of a thing. I guess I'll add real quick. One thing that a lot of younger PIs are starting to do is making kind of like a written down list of expectations that they have, like you will be in lab every day of the week, or you won't be in lab every day of the week, or we will have a weekly check-in and you will have, one figure to show me every week. You'll have a one slide update with a figure to show me every week. And at the end of the year, we will write the paper together, summarize, like if you write down those expectations going in, it can help them perform to the level that you expected them to perform, but they also can write in their expectations of you too, right? Like you will not be like messing around on Twitter during our one-on-one meetings or whatever, right? Like you will have undivided attention of your PI, of your mentor for however long that you need it, kind of a thing. So writing down expectations from both sides, and there's a lot of good examples out there. I'll see if I can find one for lab notebook, like lab expectations that you can write down in a notebook.
If I could just add to that, in fact, it's something I was going to bring up at the end. What we have been encouraged to do, and I know lots of labs do this, is to have a lab charter. And we were given a template of what the lab charter might look like. And so then what we did was to work on it as an entire lab. And this charter has the expectations at all levels. So what's expected of me, what's expected of the postdocs, what's expected of the PhD students, and then general expectations of respecting your fellow workers and communication. So I'm happy to share that with anybody who is on my lab's website. I think there's a link to it. But I think from my point of view, it is very, very important to work on that at all levels. So to have the PhD students put their input in and the postdocs put their input into this.
Do you have anything to add to this, Sarah?
No, I think those were excellent suggestions. I would say if you are given the opportunity to supervise, jump on it, though. You will make mistakes, but the only way you're going to learn is by going through that experience. So never say no to a summer student, assuming you can handle the workload. Okay, we'll make that one assumption. If you can handle the workload, it is a commitment in time. And by accepting to supervise this person, you are saying, I will spend the time to properly supervise this person, because that is their expectation of you when you're accepting to supervise that person. So make sure you meet their expectations, but definitely do jump on the opportunity if you ever can.
I think that's a great closing words for this session. I'm super happy to have you here today. I also want to point out that we'll be having some sort of similar activities during the HUPO conference, during the mentoring sessions that HUPO ECR and YPIC will host. And thanks again, all speakers. I'm super happy for this. And I think that a lot of us have learned a lot of new things, insightful things.